Recognized nationally, Collins and Lacy offers both civil and criminal defense services for insurance carriers, captives, private businesses, and individuals. From Columbia, South Carolina, with legal news and information, this is the Legal Bench.
Well, welcome to our latest edition of our podcast. We've started a new series called In Conversation With. One of the things that we're interested in doing is profiling really interesting people in South Carolina, starting with lawyers as well as judges, just other people that are shaping the conversation in our state. And I've asked my friend and a frequent adversary, David Yarborough, down in Charleston at Yarborough Applegate, to join us as our first guest. And I'm delighted to have you. David, thanks so much for being with us.
Christian, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to get to chat with you, which we do on many occasions, both in cases that we have going on, and then I think you and I end up bouncing a bunch of stuff off each other in other cases that we have related to legal issues and theories and valuations and that sort of thing. Well,
it's definitely, I think at this point, I was thinking about it the other day, I think we're getting to be about the 20th year we've been knowing each other. And I tell people, I think it started off kind of rough because we're both people that I think when we have definitive opinions about things, we want to stick with it. And I can remember a lot of friction in the early days, but as we've gone along and understood each other, I think it's become a really good relationship in as much as, everybody is advocates. They represent their client to the best of their ability, but they're not enemies. And I look at it, I've got a friend who's a lawyer in Michigan, Jack Buchanan. He said lawyers are supposed to be the peacemakers. We have clients with a dispute, and we're supposed to lead them to that resolution. Sometimes it's trial, sometimes it's dispositive motion, and sometimes, a lot of times, it's settlement and resolution that way. And that's where we've got a problem to solve, and we work with one another. And so what I've shared with people on my end is, don't look at folks on the other side as your enemy. They might have an adversarial position, and they're definitely their advocate, but you're their counterparty. And we're practicing law for a long time with one another, and the water under the bridge is deep. And when you develop these relationships and you have communication, and when you're honest with people, that's how things get resolved. So let me ask you this. A lot of folks obviously know who you are already, but tell us a little bit about your background. You're class of 98 at Carolina, right?
That's right. So I finished at the College of Charleston in 1995 and then went straight on to law school, 3 years in Columbia, and graduated in 98.
Yeah, I went straight. I finished Carolina in 94, and if I had gone straight through, we would have been together. But I went to graduate school and worked a little bit, and then I didn't finish until after you finished. I finished in 2000, but we were there at one point together, I think, for about a year. But you were a 3L. You'd already figured it out by the time I got to school there. But I think I'd narrowed my schedule down to Monday through Wednesday. So I'd leave on Wednesday nights and head down here. My then girlfriend was now wife was living on Sullivan's Island and in a little place down right on the beach, and so I would scoot down on Wednesday nights and come back on Monday mornings and knock out my 3 days of class. But it was good living back then. Yeah. And when I finished, I went to work for a circuit court judge up in Columbia for a year, Jim Barber, who's now retired, but was a great mentor and a great judge, and a lot of fun that we got to spend together, driving him around the state, meeting a lot of folks in some of the smaller, more rural counties. We were everywhere from Greenwood to Abbeville to spent a good bit of time in Marion and Florence and a little bit in Greenville and Pickens, and sort of all over the place, places I'd never been before, but places that we went and had a good time touring together and holding court, which was great. And so I did that for a year. About Judge, since you talked about Judge Barber, the thing especially as a young lawyer, everybody was scared to death of him. Because he presided over that courtroom. He really maintained control. But what just intrinsically fair person he was as a judge. And I can remember we had little kids, and somehow I hadn't gotten protection for spring break week, and we were going to New York City for the week, and we had a case come to trial in Richland County. And anybody who remembers Judge Barber, when he presided, you better be ready. If that case was on a roster, you better be ready.
He was tough.
And I was just stuck, and I was having to tell my wife that I think we're going to have to go to trial, and this was all going to get canceled. And I ended up writing him a letter. This is before I think everybody was sending emails. And he called me on the phone and he said, "Listen, you know what you're supposed to do, but I'm not going to do this to your family to where you have to cancel. But this is a lesson. Next time, get protection before you do it. But I'm not going to jam you up. We'll put it on a trial roster for some other week." And that's what happened. But I can remember him let me out of it as far as that goes. And but he was a good judge.
He was a good judge. He always tried to do the right thing, and I don't know that he was the best judge if you were a plaintiff's lawyer to be in front of. But he was fair and he was tough, and but he was good-hearted, and man, I think he fired me like 3 times while I worked for him. I was always hired back before the end of the day, but I'll never forget one time we were doing guilty pleas in Marion for like 2 weeks straight. And it was brutal, man. You would sit there for like 8 hours, and he was notoriously slow taking these pleas. He was so meticulous. And we'd go out for these huge lunches, right? The local lawyers would take you out, and you'd go eat a bunch of fried chicken and drink sweet tea and come back from lunch, and your blood sugar would spike and then plummet. And then I slipped into the back room, into the judge's chambers, and laid down on the sofa back there and was taking a nap. And he was out there doing pleas, and he looked around and looking for me to ask me a question, and I wasn't there. And so he got up off the bench and came into the judge's chambers and found me sleeping on the sofa at like 2 o'clock in the middle of the pleas. And boy, he let me have it. He was none too happy with me. But a great guy. And we still keep in touch. I just texted with him. He was one of those guys that was definitely resistant to email and electronic communications. I think Chief Justice Toll literally had to threaten to suspend him as a judge, to require him to actually, use his email and to reply to the whatever it is they have, sort of that internal intranet that the judges use before he would finally give in and do it. But now it did take him about a week to respond to my text, but he did finally respond. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you leave your clerkship. What's next for you?
So I left my clerkship, and the job market, all I wanted to do was get back to Charleston. And so
everybody else.
Yeah. Well, I grew up here, you know, and really the reason I went to law school in the first place was so that I could come back to Charleston and have a profession. I had sort of watched my dad go through a midlife crisis in his early 40s after Hugo hit. It wiped out the resort real estate market down here, and he went from making a pretty good living to all of a sudden trying to reinvent himself at age 40, you know, with a family to support and a big mortgage to pay and all of those things. And I watched him really struggle for 4 or 5 years in trying to figure out what he was going to do next. And it was not an easy thing to watch him go through. I remember seeing him, you know, fairly depressed at points and try one thing and that not work and try something else and that not work. And I don't know, I just decided that I didn't want that ever to be me. I wanted to have a profession rather than, you know, a job that I could be fired from at any time or lose at any time due to any sort of market conditions or whatever it was. And so that's when I sort of decided I was going to go to law school. And
That's funny. That's something that we have in common. My father had come from a family that had a pretty substantial family business, and he had. It was always the plan that he would join the family business once he got of age, and he joined the Marine Corps during college, and spent 6 years in the Marine Corps. Went to Vietnam, came back, finished college, got married. The family business at that point in time was not doing well, and he didn't have a real place for him. And, gets married, has these kids right off the bat. And I can remember him being 35 and 40 years old saying, boy, I wish, I had been able to go to law school or go to graduate school and become a history professor or something like that. And, those things, they impact you as a youth growing up. And it's a lesson that you learn, and I think it's interesting that you have shared that candid story, because that's something that I think about a lot. Where that was one of the things that motivated me to be a lawyer, was just being your own boss and having that autonomy to where nobody's going to fire me.
Right.
And that is something that's motivated me since day one. That's a great story you tell. That's something we definitely have in common.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was like, man, I don't ever want to be in a position where I'm struggling to feed my family and trying to figure out what, starting over in midlife with a bunch of obligations. And so, I always want to be able to go out and hang my own shingle, which I never really intended to do. But it just kind of worked out that way. And so anyway, back to your question, I get distracted easily.
I'm not helping either.
So I came down and went to work at Young Clement. The job market was still fairly soft back in '99, and I was no star student. I wasn't on the law review. I was probably middle of my class in law school. And so people were not exactly beating down my door to recruit me to come work for their big fancy law firms. And so, I'd looked around. I'd interviewed at a couple of places in Charleston. I'd interviewed at Hood. Really liked the guys over there, knew that was a great place to go to get trained, and then had also interviewed at Young Clement and got offers from both, and it just ended up seeming like that the Young Clement route. I knew that the Hood firm was a family firm, and I knew that no one ever really made equity partner if they went there. That it was a great place to get trained, but it was not a place to go where you would ever sort of rise through the ranks up to the senior ownership or whatever it was. And so I thought, well, why not give myself at least that chance? So I went to Young Clement and ended up somehow getting placed into the employment law division at Young Clement, working with some of their employment team. And so that's where I started my career. And so I did that for about 9 months. And during that time realized that employment law was not for me. I was working for some great lawyers, Carol Urban and Wilbur Johnson and Nancy Bloodgood and great lawyers over there. But employment law was boring to me, frankly. I didn't enjoy it. And so around the 9-month mark, a group of the guys that I had really bonded with at Hood left there and started Pierce, Hearn, Sloan, and McLeod. So Carl Pierce and Mullins McLeod and 6 other of their lawyers from that firm started Pierce, Hearn, Sloan, and McLeod. And they offered for me to come over as their first associate. So I was the, I think, 8th lawyer over there. And it best thing that is, professionally, one of the best things that's ever happened to me in my life. And so I got to go over there as their first associate and I started out doing asbestos defense work. That was, those guys took a big block of that work with them when they left Hood, had 10 clients with a national asbestos defense practice. And so all of a sudden I was on the road, running around all over the country, taking depositions, defending depositions, and doing that work with other really sort of good lawyers from all over the country. And we were national counsel. They were national counsel for a lot of those defendants. And so we were actually, we were preparing cases for trial and going and trying cases on the defense side. And so it was just an awesome way to cut my teeth.
Well, you were talking about all that experience, and that's almost like old school because these days it's next to impossible to get anything to go to trial. But especially being a younger lawyer in a bigger firm, letting the younger folks have the experience to be able to go take depositions, argue the dispositive motions. That's really, really invaluable experience. I'll say this about you, and I don't say this to ingratiate myself to you, but it's one of those things I think that differentiates you from a lot of lawyers. Because I knew you when y'all just started off, when you and William had just started off, and the one thing that always impressed me about y'all is. You say, well, I wasn't the best law student, but y'all really do work hard to educate yourselves. And that was something very apparent to me dealing with y'all on the front end. Y'all were real serious about CLE, really serious about reading articles, really developing a mastery of procedure, of evidence, of the case law. And I think that creates a big differentiation in the market when you've got somebody who's not only willing to go, take the cases and go to trial, but they really know what they're talking about because they've studied. What inspired you to do that? What was the motivation or the catalyst that just motivated you to be that kind of student of the law?
Well, for me, it's fear. Fear is primarily what drives most of my decisions as it relates to the need and desire to be over prepared. Fear of failure, fear of not knowing the answer, fear of losing. Fear of letting my clients down or my partner down or my co-counsel down or whoever it is, and fear of looking foolish, I guess, to the other side by not knowing what I'm talking about or what I'm doing. Like I said, I don't know. I was one of the greatest things that my parents ever instilled in me was a really strong work ethic, and so from a young age I always had a job. I always knew that I had to work for sort of whatever I wanted in life. Nothing was ever going to be given to me, not that I'm not innately intelligent, but I also am not one of those that. There were those people, frankly, that I've been in school with over the years or that we come across that everything comes very easily for them. They didn't have to study in law school and were still at the top of the class, or they breeze through all of the standardized testing and end up in the upper quadrant and percentiles and that sort of thing. That was not me. I always had to study really hard. If I studied hard, I could learn anything, but I always had to really study and prepare. And so, I've just sort of treated my job and my profession and the law in the same way. Is that it's funny, a lot of these national guys talk about being specialists and how important it is these days to be a specialist. And I get that from a marketing perspective. That's super helpful. And I know that when I do become specialized to a certain extent in one area, when I learn a lot about a particular area, it becomes easy. And it's easy to handle those cases, and that attracts people because it's easy. I end up getting good results, and other people see those good results, and it attracts those types of cases and people to sort of associate us on those types of cases. But I also get bored easily. And so I like doing a number of different things, and that's sort of what William and I have always done. There's not one area that we've necessarily stuck to. People are like, well, what type of cases do you handle? And my answer is always catastrophic injury cases. Mm-hmm. And so I don't necessarily, how the person was catastrophically injured isn't going to necessarily dictate whether I take the case or not. If the damages are there, then we can take a look at the liability and whether that lies anywhere, and what, if any, theory of liability there's going to be that that the person may be entitled to as a result of whatever happened to them. And so that's sort of, I don't know if that answers your question. It's a really long way of.
I like that.
Getting there.
It says a lot about you as a lawyer too. It's a story that's emulative of what has occurred in our firm at Collins and Lacy. My partner Joel Collins, he's tried 1,000 cases literally, and between being an assistant United States attorney and being an instructor at West Point, and then just doing Nelson Mullins, all sorts of different things, he gets bored incredibly quickly. And he has always said, listen, I don't want to do just one type of litigation. I love to learn. The central theme for him is just courtroom work. But whether it's products liability or an IP matter or something, his attitude was always, I could learn it and I'm engaged by it because it's something that's new. And it's, you make a good point, especially on the defense side. These days now, people really want to market themselves as specializing in a particular area. I think clients get a lot of comfort out of that. But
think about all the cases that you and I have had. Or you and William, between William and I have had with you over the last 15 to 20 years. I mean, ranging from
everything.
I mean, shootings to electrocutions to negligent security cases to dram shop cases to trying to think, methane gas explosion cases. Mm-hmm. I mean, there have been a bunch of different kinds, and I don't know, lots of different fun, factual situations to work through. I was remembering the case that we were talking in the beginning about the friction. You and Chris Adams. I think Chris and I almost got in a fist fight at one point. You had to come in and mediate between Chris and I, but I think that was like a construction site fall.
Yep. I remember that. Tom Wills mediated it. I remember that.
I mean, there's just been a bunch of different ones, but I don't know. It's fun, and I love doing a bunch of different cases, and there's some that I like better than others. I'm not a big fan of med mal cases. Yeah. It doesn't mean I won't take one if one really strikes me, and I feel like that something it really is wrong, and that there was something that was really messed up in a some sort of gross misconduct of some kind, then I'll certainly take that on. But I'm not trying to go out and find med mal cases.
It's funny that you say that. We had a conversation earlier in the office today about one of our partners was over at the Richland County roster meeting, and there were a couple cases on the roster that just seemed really junky. And I told her, I said, I'd hate to be in a situation, especially if I'm prosecuting, where I've got cases that I don't like.
Oh, man.
That I don't believe in. And I think even, it's easy to say now, you're at 25 years of practice and have achieved a lot of success. At this point in time, you can literally take any case you want. But, what's interesting is when the two of y'all started, and I want to ask a little bit about how you and William got together, but when William and you started, y'all just didn't take everything that walked through the door. Even then, when it was just the two of y'all over in Mount Pleasant, you were still pretty selective about what y'all took.
Well, and that was part of when we left, when we decided to start the firm, and I decided to leave. I had been at Pierce Hearns for 10 years, and am still great friends with all of those guys over there. I just decided, to be honest, their compensation system was not what I would have. I don't know. It was not set up in a way to reward those who were rainmakers and who were generating revenue and were generating new business. And so their partnership, by the time I became partner, I was the eighth partner, and then Bo and Abbott was right behind me. So that was 9. So you had 9 partners in a firm of 25 lawyers. And that's a lot of the equity was spread around, and a big chunk of it was at the top. And all of a sudden I was one of the guys at the bottom, with a small percentage of equity, but all of a sudden I was originating a huge amount of revenue over there, and their compensation system didn't allow for to take that into account. It was strictly an equity-based system where, as a partner, your percentages were your distributions, and if the guy who owned 35% was bringing in 15% of the revenue, and the guy who owned 5% was bringing in 40% of the revenue, it did not take that into account. And so it was just, in my opinion, it was broken. Yeah. And, so I decided, hey, I'm going to go do my own thing. And William and I had known each other from childhood. We can talk about that in a little bit if you want to. But I don't know. That's my biggest thing, though, in formulating our business plan, because that was the first thing we did, was we did a business plan and said, what is our business model going to be? And for me, it was not, part of what I love about my job is that I am personally invested in all of my cases. I know my clients, I know their families, I understand what happened to them and the impact that it's had on their lives. And as cliche as that may sound, it's really true when you're doing what we do and you represent these folks that have truly been catastrophically injured, because most of these folks are hardworking wage earners who are out there trying to make a living and do the best they can for their families. They are not folks with a lot of savings. They're not folks who have done a bunch of financial planning. They're folks that are out there struggling just to do the best they can. They get hurt, they get knocked out of work, or their wife gets killed, who was the caretaker of their children, or they lose a child, and it utterly destroys their family. It destroys their marriage. All of those impacts. So, in order to be able to appreciate all of that and to understand it and to live it and to be able to, part of wanting to help those people is what drives me to get the results that I do. You can't do that if you've got 500 cases. You just can't. Yeah. You have to limit your inventory. And so one of the things that I always preach is that saying no is more important than saying yes. And I try and teach that to young lawyers, people that are just starting out, people that are, that are opening their firms or going into business. I'm like, look, if you take those crappy cases, if you take those cases that you don't believe in and that you can't feel good about, you're not going to like what you do, and you're not going to like your job. And so it's sort of multifactorial. It's not only was it a business decision, it was a sort of philosophical decision and a personal decision, because those aren't the cases that I want to be handling. But also from a business perspective, our idea was to have sort of a low volume, high quality practice and handle primarily bigger cases, because that's what we had both learned to handle and been trained to handle. And in order to give those cases our best attention, in order to keep the defense on their heels and always be able to be pressing and prosecuting those cases rather than reacting, you got to keep a sort of a low inventory, a low number of cases.
Well, I hope that folks who are listening to this kind of underline what you just said about that. Two big takeaways, and you covered it. One of the things I'd written down, because I think about it a lot, is one of the most important things you need to learn is how to say no, because what you say yes to, you're saying no to something else. So if you're taking a case that you don't believe in, or it's got a low value to it, you're potentially prejudicing yourself as far as that goes. But the other thing too is, and we talk about it at our end, and we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years really developing a formula for how many cases can you defend really well? Because obviously we're not prosecuting, but we don't want to be reactive either.
Right.
And so I'll talk to some folks in our cohort, and they'll especially on workers' comp, and we've gotten out of the workers' comp completely. But these people that have 300 cases, and then on the GL side, on the litigation side, I talk to people, they say they have 150, 200 cases. On our firm, we've got it boiled down to where, on a team standpoint, no team is handling more than 35 cases at a time. And that accounts for some of the cases that are the $1,500 car wrecks, or not, well, we don't do car wrecks, but the $1,500 ER bill. And then it allots for the fact that, we've got some cases with 8-digit exposure where you got to be paying attention. And yeah. I remember Judge Anderson, the old Judge Anderson, Ross Anderson up in Anderson County, he said something in court one time. Somebody was making an excuse, a defense lawyer was making an excuse about something that hadn't been done, and he said, that's the problem with you defense lawyers, you got too many cases. But that goes across the border. So
it's true. I mean, and it's true. And then listen, and I can tell you guys, if you're not paying attention on one of our cases, and we know it, not you in particular, but you in the defense bar. I mean, we pay attention to one of the first things I look at is who's defending, who picks up the defense of this case. And then I know, I know if it's a firm that is, a mass volume firm, and I know that lawyer is going to have 200 other files that they're paying attention to and just putting out fires on. I'll know what I need to do to maximize the value of my case, and that, okay, I know what I can get away with this, with this defense lawyer, because they're not going to be ever paying attention until it's too late. And so I think it's definitely something that, but again, not everyone on your side gets to pick. Not everyone has the luxury of being able to choose their clients. And sometimes, you're in a firm and you take what's given to you and you do the best you can. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. It's just a different business model, and just like on our side, there's plenty of lawyers that have high volume practices, and nothing that I've said is to throw any shade on that. It's just that's not the business model that we decided to utilize and to come up with, and that's worked for us. There's, I have some very, very good friends that their business model is just a high volume practice, and they're not involved, and they don't necessarily care about the details of the individual cases. They're looking at it more as a business than as a law firm, or the practice of law. And I get that. That's fine. That's one way of doing it. And then there's others that practice in small towns. I mean, my good friend David Williams, Mark Tinsley, those guys that are out in Allendale and in Orangeburg, and those guys, in their minds, they can't say no, because they live in a community where it's a small rural community, and they feel like they need to help everybody. And the volume of cases that those guys have is huge. They're still getting really good cases, and they're still getting associated by lawyers on cases and all of that, to where if they wanted to, they could just have those low volume practices. But I've had numerous discussions with them, and those guys just don't feel like they can say no in their communities, and so they both end up with very large inventories, and it pulls you in a lot of directions, and I think it causes you to lose a lot of sleep at night. I know that if I had 1,000 files open, my personality is such that I would not be able to sleep at night. I would be waking up in the middle of the night thinking about my files and thinking about missing a deadline or not naming an expert or getting to mediation and not having all my records and anything like that. And I know those guys, it's a tough balance for those guys in handling. They do a great job of it. You're very familiar with both of them, and they both get great results on all of their cases. But I think it's just the nature of where they practice and what their practice is, and it works for them. It just it doesn't work for me.
I can remember one time I had two cases with Woody Gooding, Mark's partner, going at one time. And one was like an $800 ER bill, and the other one was like pretty catastrophic injury, to where it was pretty substantial exposure, especially in the 14th Circuit. And I swear to God, I think he was prosecuting them both as hard, both the same. And I was like, Woody. But I think that's exactly right.
Those guys do. They work their tails off, and they do a good job, and they work just as hard on the small ones as they do the big ones.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, I don't think Mark Tinsley ever goes to sleep. But, of course, I don't think y'all do either. But I think you're right about that. Let me I got some more questions I want to ask about your business philosophy. But the one thing I don't know if we've ever talked about is probably one of the longest running legal marriages in South Carolina is you and William. How'd y'all get together? I know you said that y'all had known each other since childhood, but that's one thing. But getting together and deciding you're going to run a business together and kind of link your fates together, how'd y'all come to that conclusion?
Well, we had known each other. We grew up around the corner from each other in downtown Charleston when we were young. He was a few years younger than me, but we all sort of ran around or rode our bikes around together on the peninsula back when kids used to do that in Charleston, and knew each other and sort of hung around the same crowds. But later in life, I started dating my now wife, and he started dating his now wife, and those two were coincidentally best friends, had grown up together, both gone to Ashley Hall, 1st through 12th grade together, and were just best friends. So when we started hanging out more, when he started dating Lydia and I started dating Jessica, and we would vacation together and travel together, and both Lydia and William had come behind me in law school. William had taken some time off after college and run a small business, and then Lydia had gone to law school. Then William went to law school, and I had gotten out. William went to work at Motley Rice, and was working over there, and we would just talk. We would go on vacation and talk about the various types of cases we were handling. And he was, I'm talking about working hard. Those guys over there, it is no joke. It's like 70, 80-hour weeks almost every week, and 2 weeks of vacation, and if you took that, you were frowned upon. And it was a tough regimen over there. And but he was learning a lot and really enjoyed the work. It was a very, I think, intellectual practice over there. He was doing securities litigation and just some sort of high-end stuff in that sort of mass tort world. And I was doing more of the single injury cases. I had migrated over at Pierce Hearns from, I had a defense practice, but in my quote free time, after I would bill 3,000 hours a year, I was allowed to work on some plaintiffs' cases. And so, and billing 3,000 hours a year in the mass tort world is not that difficult. And so I had started working on some plaintiffs' cases, had developed some referral relationships through my work in doing that, and had just, like I said, sort of gotten to the point where I had built a book of business to where I was originating fees, and had come to the conclusion that, I was going to be better off leaving and going and starting my own firm where I could have control over that revenue stream. And but I didn't want to do it by myself. And I was again sort of that fear, motivated by that fear of failure, fear of being alone, fear of not knowing the answers and not having anyone to talk to about it. So I had been talking to William along the way, and he was right at that cusp of sort of making partner at Motley Rice, which I think is the big deal over there. That, as we all do, we come in, we start working as associates, and that carrot of partnership is always out there, and you're thinking, oh, if only I can make partner, then I'm gonna be able to make all this money and have all this control and be able to make my own decisions and set my own hours and blah blah. Yeah. None of which is ever true. But but anyway, it's still like it's the goal that we all work for, right? Or at least we did. And so when I first approached William, I was like, man, I'm going to peel out. I'm going to do my own thing. I don't really want to do it by myself. I'd love to do it, with you. I think we'd do well together. We would complement each other well. And he was like, man, I'm just right here. I've been here killing myself for, 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. I'm right at the cusp of it. And, I don't know, man. It'd be hard to pull out before I get. And I was just like, man, William, come on, it's not what you think it's going to be. And so, but it was one of those decisions he had to come to on his own. And so I started working on my business plan. I started working on my pro forma. I started making preparations to leave. This was probably in spring, early summer, and I was planning for a year-end exit as sort of at the end of the year, so that it would be clean. And so I'll never forget, Lydia came by one day and was visiting with Jess, and I was sitting there typing on the computer, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm working on the business plan." I was like, she was like, "You're really going to do it?" And I was like, "I'm really going to do it." Yeah. And I was like, tell William it's getting ready to happen. And it's going to happen, either with him or without him. Mm-hmm. But once the train leaves the station, it's gone. Yeah, that's awesome. And it was funny. She left, and I didn't really expect anything to come of it. And then my phone rang that night, and William's like, "Man, let's do this." That's awesome. And he came over, and we sort of had a meeting and started talking about the vision that we each had. And I don't know, both of us had been brought up to sort of always do things the right way, and go through life and how you make decisions, and with honesty and integrity and morality, and sort of acting in a way that you treat other people the way that you want to be treated, and do things with dignity. And I don't know, we both value our reputations in the community. We had both worked hard to sort of build our reputations as people that work hard and do a good job. Mm-hmm. And, and even though we both are on the plaintiff side of representing injured people, as you know, that isn't always viewed by everyone as being the most noble of the sort of legal professions, or part of it, especially with all of the advertising that goes on these days with these idiots out there, that are claiming to get you check for a wreck and all of these things. It doesn't make it easy on folks that are out there trying to sort of really help people and make sure that wrongs are righted, and that people that have been, through no fault of their own, had their lives ripped out from under them, can find a way to be able to make it, and to be adequately compensated for whatever's been taken from them, and to be made whole again. It's not easy, and both William and I came from pretty conservative families. Everyone in, I think, William's family were defense lawyers or corporate lawyers, and so we were both wanting to make sure that our branding was commensurate with our values, and that we were building a business and a law firm that both we would be proud of, and that our families would be proud of, and that ultimately one day, hopefully, our children would be proud of.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story, great origin story as far as that goes. Y'all are up to how many lawyers now?
Well, we have 10 lawyers now. That was definitely not ever anticipated that we would grow to be a 10-lawyer law firm. Yeah. I think I said this at 8 lawyers and maybe at 9, but we are done. No more. This is as big as we want to get. But it's just been organic growth, and it's a good thing. It's a great thing. But mo people, mo problems, right?
Well, you've definitely run out of parking spaces. I know that.
Yeah, that's right.
That's good, because I was going to be kind of a question I had for you as far as what y'all. Well, I'll preface it this way. Our mutual friend Cooper Wilson told me one time, and of course he had been at Hood, and he's over at Mullins' shop now. He said, you wouldn't believe how many phone calls I get from defense-based lawyers who want to do plaintiff's work. And I tell people that all the time on our side. My greatest competition for talent is the plaintiff's bar. It's not a defense firm across the street from us.
Sure.
We've all figured it out from a compensation standpoint and all that. I think a lot of people think plaintiff's work's a lot more glamorous because they're not billing by the hour. But I think they misunderstand the fact that, I get paid irrespective of outcome. Now,
yeah.
You lose enough, you stop getting that client calling you, but y'all have got to make it happen in order to eat. What has been your growth philosophy, and how have y'all recruited? Because y'all have gotten some really great people. I know Reynolds, we recruited Reynolds way back, tried to get him to come over to Collins and Lacy. So just a sharp guy. What has led you? What's been your principle as far as growth and recruiting?
It is. It's just happened organically. William and I started. I don't know that we ever intended to build a law firm with multiple lawyers in it. But we both, when we started the firm, we both came in and brought some cases in that we were each individually working on. And as we both went out and marketed ourselves and started to get more cases in, you obviously get to a point where, as we were just talking about, you only have so many hours in a day, and there's work that needs to be done on these cases, and that the cases that we were taking in were a little bit more complex than just wreck cases. Really, we didn't have very many wreck cases. Our cases just ended up tending to be just these sort of one-off, weird, catastrophic injuries that happened as a result of a product failure or as a result of a construction site, something that happened on a construction site where somebody got killed, or an electrocution, or whatever it was. And so, it ended up being a lot of defendants, a lot of medical bills, a lot of witnesses, that sort of thing. So we ended up hiring Douglas Jennings and David Lale straight out of law school as our first two associates. And, for the first 5 years they were there, we had them to help sort of support us in working on our cases. And then during that 5-year period, both of them started to develop their own reputations and to grow as lawyers. And so not only were they working on our cases, but they developed their own books of business. And they're both really great at originating business, at making, I know you've worked with both of them, and they're both just absolutely fantastic lawyers, and are both rainmakers, and they're both great at getting business. And so, over the course of that 5-year period, we were continuing to attract more cases and more work, but during that time, they were also building up their inventories of cases. So we needed additional help on working on the cases that we were bringing in, and so you end up hiring people not only to support William and I, but to support David and Douglas, so that they could go out and get more business, and that just sort of had that domino effect of, now, and then the two of them got to the point where, we recognized the value of bringing them on board as equity partners. And so we ended up doing that 4 or 5 years ago, and folding them into the partnership. And we've all, just the four of us, have continued to grow, and the brand has continued to grow. Yep. And, like I said, we probably have 150 cases open in-house that are managed between 10. We have 10 lawyers working on those 150 cases, and that's a number that we feel very comfortable with, to where we can push those cases. Each partner has about, whatever that is, somewhere between 30 and 40 cases that they're managing, with a number of associates working on those cases underneath them. So we have 6 associates, and some of our associates, actually many of our associates, were partners at other defense law firms who decided to come over here and wanted to practice with us and take a shot at being a plaintiff's lawyer. And several of those that have come over, who've come to us, and then a couple of them, we have actually gone out and recruited, like Perry, for instance. Perry was someone that we had had our eye on for quite a while, and that had been highly recommended as someone that everyone felt like was on the wrong side and was doing really good work. And Perry was a partner over at Young Clement and had a great practice. But we felt like he would be a great addition to the team. So we went out and recruited him. And then there've been others like, Reynolds, who we just happened to work with on the other side of a case. And we're so impressed with him in a trial. And literally, that we were like, man, we gotta hire that guy. We gotta figure out how to get him to come work with us.
He can work a case, let me tell you.
Yeah,
he'll make you work.
So anyway, just to following up to your point earlier, it is not all defense lawyers make good plaintiffs lawyers, and so it is a lot. It is a much different way of thinking about things. It's a much different way of handling the case. And so part of our strategy is definitely sort of trying to vet that out and think about, hey, is this, you can be plenty smart. You can be, a great legal strategist on the defense side, and still maybe not be the best personality to be on the plaintiff side.
Oh yeah. There's a lot to the plaintiff's practice that I admire, but I also have enough self-awareness to know I'd be a terrible plaintiff's lawyer. There are about 6 different reasons why. So I am where I'm supposed to be, and obviously you're where you're supposed to be as far as that goes. Let me ask you kind of a follow-up question to staffing. The secret to any firm's success is the support staff as it relates to paralegals and then the assistants. The thing I've noticed about y'all is you've got some paralegals that have been with you essentially from the start. How have you made that happen? Because I tell you, from a management standpoint, we get resumes all the time from all sorts of different people, all sorts of different law firm settings, where I can tell the same law firms, they just tear people up. They'll be there for a year or two and they're out. Maybe because personalities, maybe because it's compensation, maybe because it's culture. But y'all seem to have figured it out, at least on your side. What's been kind of the secret to your success as far as maintaining continuity in your support ranks?
Well, I wish it was as simple as you made it sound for us, but it has been the biggest challenge for us is the staffing, and it's just been, I think it's been because we didn't really have a growth plan, and so we went from 2 lawyers, and when William and I started, it was the 2 of us and a legal secretary who left Pierce Earns with me. She was my legal secretary over there. It was the 3 of us. We started in a conference room where we all had a desk, and that's what we did for the first 6 months. Mm-hmm. Then we moved into, William and I had our own offices, and Laura sat at the front desk and answered the phones and did the books and did the paralegal work and did it all. And then we hired a paralegal, and then we went to hiring a second paralegal. But for a long time, it was our office manager / legal secretary / receptionist, Laura, and then 2 paralegals and 4 lawyers. And then we brought on a 5th lawyer, and then we brought on a 6th lawyer, and then we brought on a 7th lawyer, and we never grew. The paralegal piece it took us a while to figure that out. Yeah. And to get that ratio right. And I think now it took us a long time to figure that out, Christian. Yeah. And because the growth plan was not, because it was organic and it wasn't planned, and then you're trying to figure out, how to 2 different paralegals or 3 different paralegals serve, 6 or 7 different lawyers, and they're answering to each of those different lawyers and trying to learn their styles. And so it's definitely been a very challenging thing, but I think we finally got it figured out. And so, we have, I think, 5 paralegals right now. We have 5 paralegals right now. And that seems to be working well for us. So, we try and maintain a good culture. We try and pay over market. Obviously, these days, with inflation and everything, we try and compensate our people really well. But the thing I've learned is that money will not keep people. You can't substitute money for a good quality of life and a good work culture, because they'll leave anyway. It doesn't matter what you offer or what you pay them. If people aren't happy, and if they're getting crushed and they're going home at night feeling like overwhelmed with anxiety, and they're not enjoying their jobs because of all the pressure that they're under, they're not going to stick with you. So I think that's what we've tried. We've tried to create a culture where, nobody is overwhelmed, where their caseloads are manageable. We shut down the office for 2 weeks over Christmas. We close early on Fridays a lot during the summer. We take off, the better part of a week for Thanksgiving. We try and give everyone plenty of sort of time off create a culture of support and kindness and understanding, and I think that's the best you can do. And I think you want to do that stuff anyway, but I think you have to do it these days if you want to attract good talent.
Well, treating people well and with respect, that is fundamental. And the other thing too, especially with what we do, when you're putting people in a position to be overwhelmed and you're just crushing folks, you're exactly right. No amount of money is going to keep them in that situation. Because, and the other thing too is if they're going home every night because they're hating their lives, they've got spouses or significant others saying, "Why are you living like this?" And creating that kind of influence to where they're telling them they just need to leave. And so we've looked a lot at that. We've done the math, and we're identical to y'all. We have one paralegal per two lawyers, and our paralegal file load right now is about 35 to 40 cases. And so they're able to focus on doing the work, but not getting killed. If we suspect that our caseload is getting higher, or, we've got cases that require more assistance, we don't hesitate to add on another paralegal if necessary as far as that goes. But when people are miserable, they don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. And that's what I tell people all the time. And, we talk a lot about that too, as far as the younger lawyers, bringing in younger lawyers. I said, treat these paralegals like they're the gunnery sergeants and you're the second lieutenant, man. You don't know anything. You need to give them a lot of deference because they've been around and they know what's going on. And when they tell you to do something, you do it.
Absolutely. I mean, it is the best advice that anyone can give. That was one of the early mistakes I made at Young Clement, is I rolled in there thinking that I was above the paralegals, and that was very quickly and abruptly was I made aware of my misunderstanding of the pecking order and things, there was a lot of professional naivety on my part, not having ever worked in a in a big professional environment, in a law firm environment, and you spend 3 years in law school and roll in there and think that the secretary and the paralegal work for you. No siree. That's not how it works. She's since left the firm, but I had a first year associate one time essentially give me some sort of ultimatum. It's either her or me, referring to a paralegal. And I said, you don't want me making that choice. No way. Your feelings are going to get hurt. They're going to get hurt. Yeah. So, I mean, it really is. I mean, the best thing that these young lawyers can do is ingratiate themselves to the paralegals and learn everything they can from them. Well, let me ask you two sets of questions, and I know you got to run, but these are ones that I think a lot of folks are going to be interested in. I know I will be. And one's on the plaintiff side, one's on the defense side, because you're like me. You've got a lot of visibility to what's going on. What in your opinion are without being overly critical, I guess, but you look on your side of the bar, what are some of the folks on the plaintiff side just doing wrong, as it relates to maybe working cases up, evaluating cases, trial? I'll tell you, one of my attitudes is I don't think enough cases are getting tried. There are some cases that will resolve where it's like, man, if that had been a different law firm, this would have been a much different number. What are you looking at where you're just like, man, it almost makes you scream that you see maybe some of your colleagues are doing that you maybe say at the trial attorneys convention in Hilton Head, y'all got to be doing this different. What are some of those things? Well, as you probably know, I mean, you probably I think you and I have talked about this. I came out and was pretty highly critical of some of the antics that have been going on by some of our colleagues on the plaintiff side, and some of what we feel like are abuses that have been taking place that are starting to sort of erode away at some of the tools that we on the plaintiff side have to our advantage, and namely the Tiger River Doctrine. As you know, I sort of authored that bad faith book that was really more of a compendium of cases and sort of a summary of the case law in South Carolina. Pardon me?
I said somebody had to do it. That's a great book. That's a great.
Well, it's been a great marketing tool as well for us. But as we've seen over the last couple of years, there's definitely people that are out there playing sort of legal gotcha on some things related to these time-sensitive demands and other sort of situations where liberties are being taken that maybe shouldn't be taken. And so I don't know, again, I don't like to be critical of anyone else in terms of you don't know what people's training and background necessarily are, and what they come to the table with and their understanding of how to handle a case. But, certainly I see people that don't work up cases the same way that I do, and you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
But I think that the biggest thing that I think that where people probably make mistakes is by not asking for help when they when they get a case that they've don't know quite how to handle or what to do with it, and rather than go to someone else and ask for help in working on it together, they try and handle it themselves. And as a result, either their client suffers or we as a plaintiff's bar overall suffer because they end up making some mistake that results in, or they take some position that's not reasonable or not viable that results in a bad legal opinion or decision that then ends up going up and, like I said, sort of wiping out some type of theory or doctrine, or creates bad case law for us on the plaintiff side. That, had they known not to take that position, or had they been coached not to take that position, or had they had help, they could have won that issue on other grounds. But people are sometimes being too short-sighted, and I don't know whether that's ego-driven or whether it's fear-driven or what it is. But I think that, again, as when we started talking, I'm a huge fan of asking for help. I wouldn't have gotten to where I am today without receiving help from many, many different people. I still ask for help. I mean, if I get a product liability case, I call Ronnie Crosby. If I get a medical malpractice case, I call Randy Hood. Right. Or one of these other guys, Cooper Wilson, or some of these guys that did the med mal defense side. I go to Perry. I go to, whatever it is. I mean, when I get something that's sort of outside of what I feel like is my comfort zone, I'll go get someone else involved, or I'll go to someone else for help. And I just, because I recognize the value of doing that, A, it helps me learn for next time, and B, it's better for my client. Yeah. And so I just think that there's a lot of folks out there that probably could stand to do a little bit more of that. Yeah. And I think that their clients would be better off.
I guess the two things I would say in response to everything you said, number one, you and I have talked about this Tiger River business. I think both sides need Tiger River, but we don't need the misuse of it. When I've gotten Tiger River letters from you, it's been the week before mediation, or when we've done enough discovery to where everybody knows what's up. But these pre-suit limits demand, time limit demands, where this letter is the first notice of the claim a lot of times.
Right.
You've got 15 days to put up $1 million. I cannot.
And by the way, don't send me a check. I want a bank draft or whatever it is.
Well, all that, and here it is. I mean, all that's bullshit. And my attitude is you're wrecking it for a lot of folks as far as that goes. And what I've told people, that I got a letter like this a couple weeks ago from one of these advertising firms, and I mean, the letter was the first notice of the claim. We've got to investigate. And what I said to them, it was a real young lawyer on the other side. He was operating at the direction of somebody who thought he was pretty clever. And I said, I can't move for summary judgment in South Carolina because the case law says until substantive discovery is transpired, summary judgment isn't ripe. And I said, if that's the law in South Carolina, how do you expect us to put up limits in a matter we don't know anything about, but we're going to have to investigate? I said, the other thing, too, is we haven't taken any testimony under oath. And so if you'd like to litigate this to the Supreme Court, you're talking to the right guy as far as that goes. And so I didn't hear anything else about it. But that stuff aggravates the hell out of me. And I'll tell you the second thing, and we hadn't talked about it, and we probably get into it here in a second, based on probably something, just based on a prior conversation you and I have had that I would anticipate you'll talk about. But on the plaintiff side in mediation, Carl Folkens takes a position that if you're a defense lawyer and you don't do an opening statement, you've committed malpractice. And I think that probably 99% of the time that's right. Sometimes, for whatever reason, you don't need an opening statement because you're just going to screw up the settlement discussions that day or whatever. But by and large, doing an opening statement, I think makes a lot of sense. But I am amazed, and I'd say probably 50% of the time when I go to mediation, I don't think the plaintiff's lawyer has talked to the client at all about what to expect. I don't think there's been a lot of substantive conversation about managing expectations concerning real resolution value. I'm sure plaintiff's lawyers, they get tired of the the line of we're here in good faith and we're here ready to work. But there's a corollary to that on the plaintiff side where they just say, y'all understand what our case is about, and we're looking forward to working with you today, and just dump it all back on the mediator. But again, like I say, what becomes very apparent during the course of the day, and why I think a lot of mediations take more time than necessary, is because I don't think the plaintiff's lawyer has spent a lot of time educating his or her client about the case, about the law, about what the parameters are, about what the case is really worth. And it just it exacerbates the situation. And the reality, if that conversation had been had, because you and I've settled a bunch of cases without mediation, if you have that conversation earlier and the client knows what to expect, there's nothing that keeps you from settling a case without mediation and doing it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, well, going back to what you were talking about a little while ago, before we get into that, it was just the idea that, reasonableness is what I talk about when talking about the whole Tiger River doctrine and the duty to settle and the duty to protect the insured. And so, to those listening on the defense side, what I would say is, when you get a demand that is not reasonable, or when you get a demand that does not have the information that you need in order to properly assess and evaluate the claim, I think you need to think about who it's coming from, and you need to think about, is the person on the other side really someone that could, I don't know. I just think that a lot of people, half the plaintiff's lawyers that are sending out these letters have never read the Tiger River case. They don't know what it's about. They couldn't tell you. They don't understand the difference between first party and third party, and nor do they even have the slightest clue about what they would actually have to go through in order to have standing to bring a bad faith claim by way of an assignment or direct representation of the defendant, or however they may otherwise need to accomplish that, and whether or not a particular issue is even assignable, whether a cause of action is even assignable. There are a lot of those questions out there amongst the defense bar that I know y'all feel are unsettled, and I don't know. It's just that there's a lot to think about. So,
Yeah.
people have asked me and what advice I have to give, to the defense lawyers is I think you have to take a lot of those things into consideration. And ultimately, as you know, at the end of the day, you have to look not at the insurance company, but at the client and make sure that insured is protected. But I don't know. I just think that there could be some more pushback on those that I think that people could be a little bolder in pushing back. And I'm not talking about in a catastrophic injury dram shop case where where people are dead or catastrophically injured and there's just clear damages that could exceed the policy limits if things go bad for your client. I'm talking about some of these smaller, like you said, sort of bullshit wreck cases that are, I've heard stories about some of these lawyers requiring, like, defense firms requiring, like, their insured clients having them pay out of their own pocket when a Tiger River letter's been blown. And there's not even a judgment. There's not even an assignment. There's nothing. Yeah. And it's just kind of crazy to me that things have sort of taken that flavor. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that. I don't know if that makes sense.
My attitude is this might end up getting litigated at one point. Maybe it settles some things out, but be careful what you ask for. But what's good about it, it's kind of like baseball. Like when the pitcher beans somebody, somebody told me the other day, baseball is the best self-policing thing in the world. And, y'all get together down on Hilton Head here in a couple weeks. And I think that's probably a good opportunity. We do the same thing. The defense bar is not as good as the trial bar as far as we don't have a listserv or anything like that. But, I think you have enough folks like you who are senior, people like you, Mullins, Mark, David, who are just saying, listen, we're not going to do this, and y'all need to quit it. I feel like hopefully that's going to be a good way to kind of police it, because I tell people, I don't have a problem with Tiger River. Just let me do some investigation first. Let me take some testimony under oath, or alternatively, use it appropriately to where, don't send me a Tiger River letter when there's $20,000 in damages. I think you made a good example. If you've got multiple fatalities and $1 million in coverage, even if liability is questionable, you probably need to start looking at writing the check. But this one size fits all business, I think is pretty lazy.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Well, let me ask you this to wrap up. So I've asked you about the plaintiff side. Let me ask you about the defense side. Whether it's mediation or settlement or discovery, what are some places where you're just seeing like, some of y'all need to fix it up and get it right?
I just feel like we have a great defense bar in South Carolina, Christian. If anything, a little bit about what we've talked about earlier, which is which is no fault of the individual lawyers, is that some of the folks with the higher volume practices aren't able to pay attention to the cases as much as they need to. And sometimes that inures to our benefit, but sometimes it doesn't. I often, it's funny, think about unanswered prayers and things that we would have go different ways, but a lot of people want to talk about the Amazon verdict, and that's somewhat an example of that, which is a case that I never anticipated that I would end up trying. It was a case that should have been settled. It was a case that could have been settled, but it wasn't because people weren't paying attention to it. That wasn't the fault of any one person. I think it was just how it turned out, and it was the corporate legal strategy that Amazon had at the time, where they were sort of putting their head in the sand, and they were allowing the case to be defended by the insurance company for the quote independent contractor, the DSP.
Right.
And so, but that person didn't have the tools that he needed to adequately defend the case. And he was being limited by Amazon's corporate counsel, in-house counsel that was operating in the background, that was disconnected, that, he was being paid by one insurance company, but then he was being directed by Amazon's in-house people, and the information that was being given to him was limited. And so I think he was really hamstrung. And then all of a sudden, some other lawyers came in who were less experienced, and probably shouldn't have been handling the case at all. And so I don't know. It was one of those cases where if you would have asked me back in December, I was very frustrated over the fact that the case had not been defended as it should have. People had not been paying attention to this case, and in my opinion, I was frustrated because my client was hurting and needed money and was struggling financially and had been out of work for 2 years and had $500,000 in medical bills, and was frankly like, hey, is this thing going to settle? What's going on? What, am I ever going to see any compensation for this? Am I ever going to get any relief? And I'm like, I don't, I would have thought so, but they're not looking at this and not handling this case the way that most other lawyers do. And so at that time I was very frustrated. Fast forward, 5-6 months, and I'm very happy that they did not back at the time do all of those things that should have been done and resolve the case by settlement. Because frankly, I would have settled that case for probably, I don't know, somewhere $8-9 million. That I would have settled it pre-trial. And as a result, it's a case that'll feed me for the rest of my life, because that's, you get a verdict like that, and not only did it end up being a great result for my client, but I've gotten an avalanche of business since that happened, and I've got Amazon cases in multiple states now that are, huge catastrophic injury and death cases that I'm so thankful for. I'm so thankful for the decisions that were made or not made, the actions or inactions of counsel early on. But I don't know, I think it's a combination of sort of experience and by the defense lawyers that were handling the case, and then somewhat being handcuffed by your clients and them not allowing you to properly defend the case the way that you see fit. And I know that that's something that you guys deal with on your side a lot. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Good. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned over the years that I try to teach the younger folks is you got to say what needs to be said to the client. And when, you're getting in a situation where, and I've been in it's all sorts of different circumstances where you've dealt with a claims handler or a client who seems to know better than you do, and is can just kind of overrun the whole conversation. You got to stand up for yourself and just say, listen, it's in your best interest to start listening, and let's get real and let's pay attention. And there have been instances, especially within the last several years, defending cases where, it's just wrong. Like whatever they want to do is just stupid. And you have to, instead of just going along because that's what the client has told you to do, you actually have to be the lawyer and provide that advice. And there have been instances where we've parted ways, but I'm not going to take some massive verdict simply because I was following orders. I'm supposed to be the lawyer in the equation. I will give you the advice, but if you don't want to listen to any of it, and we're just going to get led down the primrose path, I'm going to be very, very candid and very frank with you.
But you're in a position now to do that, and I think that's the thing that I think, and you and I have had that conversation a bunch of times. You're like, man, I've seen this book play out, and I think you actually have been, I think, in like 3 of our cases that ended up in 8-figure verdicts.
Yeah.
You were in there early on and got your people the hell out of there and watched it go on to be a really tough situation for the people that hung around.
Yeah.
And so I think that you've gotten to that point where in your career, and you've had that experience to be able to say, you're not afraid to tell your clients what your thoughts and opinions are based on your experience, and like, hey, this is what you need to do. And if you don't, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's really hard for these young lawyers. Like I had a case recently where there was this lawyer on the other side, and it just baffles me that this person kept saying saying things that just didn't make sense. As defense lawyer, she did not have the experience to be taking the positions that she was taking, and I knew that. Yeah. I knew that this person did not have the requisite trial experience or life experience or whatever to be giving these opinions that they were giving to this client, and it was hard to watch. Yeah. And it's hard to be on the other side of it for part of that part of that time. But I think that's sort of the big thing is, and the hard thing from our side is that, but again, sort of the disappearing art of trial. Yeah. Not a lot of these younger lawyers that are coming along are not getting to try cases like I did and you did early on, and so they're not developing the experience that they need in order to be able to advise the clients. Yeah. Properly. And I think that's going to be a problem going forward. And you said it. I mean, more cases need to get tried. On our side, the plaintiff's side, we need to try more of our good cases, not just our shitty cases, because that's what most of us end up doing. We end up, you guys, the good cases get settled, and then we end up having to get stuck with trying the cases that are tougher from us. Now, some of those still result in really big verdicts sometimes, and we try those cases because we get forced to. We either try it because we've got a tough set of facts, and someone's dug in on the defense side and just says, "I don't see it," and it goes the wrong way. Or else we try it because we truly, it's a tough case, and we end up going and getting our teeth kicked in.
Well, and trying some of these cases would probably help both of us on both sides, because we're, on our side, the trials would create the market as far as what the market price for some of these cases are. The one thing that, I recognize, I don't think everybody on the defense side, including the insurers and the self-insured folks, have recognized yet is it's a different world post-COVID. And there are just some
big time.
There's some different attitudes about valuation. And the thing I'm starting to appreciate, and I think I'm ahead of the curve compared to a lot of other folks, is that especially from a general damages, hedonic damages standpoint, pain and suffering, there's a lot more value attached to that than I think a lot of people want to acknowledge or admit. And some folks are learning the hard way about it.
If you have permanency. Yeah. You have to have permanency. If you have a permanent injury with a chronic pain condition that is real, that you can prove, that has real value. Yeah. If you have pain and suffering from a car wreck case that then is gone after 6 months or a year, I just don't see how that has a lot of value. I don't think that it does. I think that the value that is now out there is anything that permanently impairs someone in their ability to enjoy their life going forward. That if you have the right storyteller behind that, it has immense value.
Well, I appreciate that distinction because, again, it's almost akin to the Tiger River thing where you've got some folks just wanting to jam the same peg into the same hole, and no two cases are alike. And that's what we try. That's what we try to say, at least on our side, as far as defense goes. Listen, I try to be reasonable, but you made a perfect illustration where somebody gets hurt. They're not permanently injured. There was a period of time where there was pain and suffering. Glad to compensate you for that. That's something reasonable and fair, but it's different from being paralyzed. It's different from being without a limb for the rest of your life. And I just deal sometimes with some folks who they don't want to create distinctions, and I just try to tell folks, it's like, listen. Let's live to fight another day, but no two cases are the same. Let's get this one settled, and I promise you, you'll get the catastrophic injury that comes down the road, and we'll litigate that case, and the valuations will be much different.
Yeah.
But on my side, one of the things I've got people that still want to try to settle wrongful deaths for $500,000, and it's not 1982 anymore, and again, that's a situation where some folks just have to learn the hard way, but it's not without a lot of counsel on our side. Let me ask you the last question here. I don't know how much longer you're planning on practicing. You're still a young guy, but one thing I think about all the time is, if from here to whatever the end is, what do I want to try to accomplish? Is there anything out there that exists where you just say, man, I want to do this before it's all said and done?
I don't think so, man. I still love what I do. I don't, I hadn't gotten a 9-figure verdict yet, so that's next on my list of things of like personal accomplishments. I would like to do that in a sort of big, tough, disputed liability, battle. William and I both. That's sort of on our list of things to do together. But that's not that'll be great if it happens. But man, I feel like I don't know, if I could just maintain the status quo, man. I love my job. I love my law firm and people I work with, and I hope that maybe one day one of my 4 kids will want to come practice law with me, and I can share with them what I've learned. And I love mentoring people, so I like helping young lawyers. I've shepherded, I don't know, a half a dozen young lawyers out into start their own firms from defense firms and other plaintiffs firms or whatever over the last probably 10 years or so, and just sort of offering them advice. And I like teaching and sort of sharing what I've learned with others. And so I don't know. I just want to keep doing good work. And obviously the goal for me is fewer bigger cases, right?
Yeah.
A fewer number of cases with the injuries and the damages and the complexity of the cases getting sort of bigger, and so that you can focus more, be more granular in focusing on those. And but yeah, man, I just want to keep going and really, I've got great law partners. I've got a great support staff built up around us, and I really enjoy what I do. I enjoy working with folks on your side. I was very difficult as a young lawyer. I was bombastic. I'm a fighter, man. I used to love a fighting. I was a fighter growing up, man. I used to love getting a fist fight, and I love getting a fight with the defense lawyer on the other side and scrapping over stuff. And but the funny thing is, as I've gotten older and more experienced and sort of, I guess, less of anything to prove, I really enjoy making friends more than anything with guys that I have on the other side of cases, and really one of my big sources of business is from defense lawyers these days. A lot of my referrals come from defense lawyers at big firms that have they have a client that gets in a bind, and you have a corporate executive or an insurance adjuster whose mother's in a nursing home and got neglected or dropped or developed a pressure sore, or they have a cousin that got hit by an 18-wheeler or whatever it is. And they're trying to think of a plaintiff's lawyer that they could be proud to send their family member to, who's not a sleaze bag, who's not a cheese ball, who's not wearing a cheap suit, who's not, on a billboard somewhere, and that they are going to be comfortable sending a family member or a corporate client to, and that's us. They know when they come down here, they're going to get treated with class. They're going to get treated with respect. They're going to get they're going to have a professional experience. And that makes me really happy and really proud. I mean, and a good example of that is I was just wrapping up a case, that Amazon case, and I was wrapping it up, and well-known defense lawyer was hired to handle the appeal in South Carolina after the trial was bungled by these out-of-state lawyers. That is another story for another day, but a very well-known and well-respected defense lawyer at a big firm in South Carolina was hired to handle the appeal, and we went through post-trial negotiations, and it was recognized that it was a case that needed to be settled by the defense, and we went through all of the process and ended up settling the case. And about a week after the case settled, I got a phone call from that lawyer who wanted to bring me in as lead trial counsel on a case that they had, which is something I never would have expected, but it was a huge compliment for me. And it's like potentially a $20 million big case, and that's sort of been teed up, but that they felt like needed a plaintiff's trial lawyer on it. It's a subrogation matter, and so I don't know. That's, to me, sort of the highest form of compliment. And if I can keep doing that and making good friends and relationships with people, I mean, like you and I went at it for so many years, at each other's throats and sort of aggressively on the other side of cases, and then ended up sort of becoming friends and becoming people that talked and bounced ideas off of each other and collaborated on things. And then now you're mediating cases for me on a pretty regular basis now, and doing a fantastic job of it. And I have relationships with other Brad Waring and Kurt Rozelski and Chris Daniels, and many of sort of the top guys that I've gone up against in my career have now sort of moved into the mediation space, and I really enjoy that process of working with them. And some of them I've helped get them into that space, and encourage them. They're like, hey, you would be really good at this. And I don't know, it's just kind of fun to watch people's careers develop and to develop those professional relationships. That it's an interesting business that we're in, because it is adversarial, and we are on the opposite side of things, trying to get the best results for our clients, but we don't always have to be at war in order to do that.
Well, I tell people all the time, it's about building and fostering relationships, open lines of communication, and just mutual respect. And you do all those things, you're going to be able to work through any problem that you've got. So, well, David Yarborough of Yarborough Applegate, Charleston, South Carolina. David, thank you so much for your time today. We've run about an hour and a half long. I know you've got some stuff to do, but you've been more than kind with your time, and I know a lot of folks are going to listen carefully to some of your advice today here.
Well, thanks for having me, and I feel like I probably did a lot of rambling today, but the two of us rambled together, and awesome. Maybe you can clip this up so it's not quite so long and doesn't bore people to death. Don't listen to it while you're driving. You might fall asleep.
You've been listening to The Legal Bench from the attorneys at Collins & Lacy. For more information about the nationally recognized law firm, visit collinsandlacy.com.